Through the 12th and the 15th of February, I set 3 scores that would garner a total of 8,000 views. These scores were a 1.2k, a 1.3k, and a 2k, set on the maps Isogu and Devochka. After the plays were set, a large amount of people claimed that they had been done using DKS or another form of macro in order to create more inputs than what were actually being performed. This led to a OC report post being created before my account was banned entirely under suspicion of cheating. I have already sent a lengthy appeal to staff, including that I was willing to provide any additional evidence needed, which was declined. Because of that, I am making this video to provide additional evidence, clear my name publicly, and to hopefully have my account unrestricted. The base of these accusations are that the accuracy and streaming speed of my plays are impossible, getting 94 to 99% on 520 to 620 beats per minute. To start off on why this isn't the case, I'm going to need to explain my 2 tapping techniques. A more in-depth guide will be included in a Google Doc link in the description, but due to its length, I will be leaving it out of the video. First, the main idea is to utilize parts of both rake tapping and the 120 cell method. To get the effects of rake tapping, simply slant your hand at an angle that will allow both of your fingers to glide across 2 keys each. This should cause your middle to go from K1 to K2, and your pointer from K2 to K3. Since the additional tap on K3 won't naturally register to an endgame bind, use keyboard software to set K3 to the same binding as K1. This will already 2 times your tapping if done perfectly, but sliding back by raising your fingers can also give another 1 to 2 taps, bringing in a total of 3 times CPS. While this is near a gray area, the player the technique is named after, 120 cell, has used the method for years in multiple tournaments, as it's completely within the rules. Other people have also used this, mostly to get rake tapping scores, and Peppy is completely fine with the method being used. The second technique is harder to explain, but relies on abnormal forearm, wrist, and hand movement in order to generate an extra tap for K1. By rotating your forearm, rotating and jumping your wrist, while slightly extending your fingers, you can consistently 1.5 times your tapping with a small tap immediately preceding the normal. Already, these should give a good basis on how the visual discrepancy of multiple taps is created, and are not from a program, but are instead from using a good mashing technique that no one had tried or seen before. Alongside both these techniques, I do utilize other methods of tapping, such as standard raking. These aren't as common and weren't directly what were used in the previously mentioned scores, but will be included in the description. With that out of the way, I'm going to go back to the main point, the claim that my accuracy on 500 to 600 BPM being impossible. This is immediately disprovable. From what I was able to personally gather, most people didn't look towards the UR in either scores that had it visually enabled, or still believed the UR would be too difficult to achieve. Under normal circumstances, the OD8 timing of the map provides a 300 hit window of 63 milliseconds. However, to set these plays, I use the laser modification difficulty adjustment, which allows you to edit whatever map attribute you want. To maximize the worth of these scores, the OD was set to 0, as the rework in that time assumed the best out of scores set on looser timing requirements. With the 1.08 times DT to set the map to an optimal difficulty polling timing, the map had an OD of 0.99, which gave a 300 window of 146 milliseconds. Endgame, this would give a UR of up to 292 milliseconds in SS, with the scores I've set averaging 340 UR. This UR is easily doable due to 2 main reasons. Execution of the raking pattern of the first technique is relatively slow and gives a deviation of around 200 milliseconds, with any extra or missing taps, along with human error, increasing the UR by 100 to 150, but still being fairly manageable. You can see how this works best on my Babetsu HR play, with clicks happening in chunks. Increased spacing can avoid any additional taps entirely, making your UR become more dependent on how well you can aim solely within notes that are in the 300 timing window, rather than actually focusing on your tapping. Combined with the shortness of the maps, a technique that can 3 times your taps, and a 290 UR 300 and a 520 UR 100 hit window, it just took a lot of gambling. And for even further reference on the ease of these scores, the player Laissez-Faire was able to get a similar UR on a stacked stream map, which is extremely more difficult to manage than what my scores required. Next, I'll be talking specifically about the accusations of DKS before grouping DKS and macros as a whole together, since the evidence afterwards refutes both and DKS is a macro. First, it does not give you the speed required to hit 500 BPM. Chud tapping only flips when the tap would normally happen, and doesn't add any new taps to the process. For every combination of DKS I've seen or tried, it will hold a tap for the exact same millisecond every time, and will cap out at 350 to 400 BPM, unless you set it to also use mouse keys. You could point to the missing key overlay in 2 of the scores as suggesting that being the case, but I already explained why they weren't displayed, and in none of my stable plays do I use mouse buttons. The replays will also be provided of those scores, so you can watch the inputs yourself. Second, in all my main live plays, I showed all of my wooting profiles where none had any special keys enabled, with all but my main profile being set to max actuation. The only reason there were even additional profiles at all was because the version of utility I used at the time had a required minimum. Third, you can very clearly see when I tap the jumps in live plays that I'm not chud tapping. Fourth and last, I alternate on 90% of jumps and have no issues holding sliders with either key, which would make chud tapping impossible. Moving on, this section will be arguments that apply to any kind of macro. I reached out to Minisbett, who created both the hold time analyzer and the real-time wooting monitoring program, which were used to determine that Cloudiful had cheated his plays. The hold time analyzer creates graphs using replay input data, which will be used for evidence later. For this point specifically, I'm going to be talking about the monitoring software. What the software does is retrieve all of the raw data from a chosen wooting device during the time of a chosen recording period. The start of how this works is opening the program file, which presents an option to choose a wooting device. Afterwards, pressing enter will start a recording and begin recording data. The first data that is retrieved is your current time in Unix code, the vendor ID, product ID, manufacturer, device name, device ID, and device type. The program then begins reading the raw input data of the wooting device, with each device poll being given a number, timestamp, key code, and the analog value for how high the key is in percentage. Once enter is pressed, frames from then on begin being logged. Each recording logs any instance where a key is pressed at the polling rate of the keyboard. At the end of the recording, it logs the amount of errors, generates a certificate, and a file hash. When a recording is ended, the file is automatically saved into a folder in a JSON notepad format. To disprove the idea that I might have tampered with the logs, Minisbett checked these logs with a private visualization program, which even includes a side-by-side of the log data next to the OSU replay file data. In these 2 images sent by Minis, the inputs from the logs perfectly match the inputs in the replay. After sending my last plays, I also asked Minis on if measures were in place to prevent tampering, which was given the response that there are non-public methods and that it would be generally difficult to do. In the recording sent to Minis, you can also see that I include sending the OSU replay file and the recording logs. Not only do they both match each other, but they perfectly match the gameplay on my monitor, along with my hand movements. This includes both random movements during breaks, and switching between mashing, raking, and normally tapping sections. The perfect example being a 48-minute score on Because Maybe Marathon, which will be mentioned later. These logs also line up with the same time relative to the pulling rate of my looting and the length of the maps, which should disprove any claim of time warp. More than 10 scores were set under the monitoring software, including a score worth 2 times my Isogu 2K, a choke on Renard Marathon at 1.25 times speed, and several other speed and aim slot plays which I'll be showing on the screen. Every guideline was followed, and outside of my inputs not counting, issues were never found. In visualization graphs Mini showed, you can see the exact inputs for both techniques mentioned earlier. Because her program was able to fetch both my device and vendor IDs, I will not be making the complete monitoring files public, unfortunately. Instead, in the Google Drive link, I'll be providing the full logs, but without that information. She also requested that I make it clear her analysis does not entirely clear me of cheating. As with any detection, it just makes it less likely. I asked for analysis from TheMagicAnimals, a well-known rake tapper, who also came to the conclusion that the inputs present in my plays weren't suspicious. I have also reached out to 4 other non-banned rake tappers, 3 of which responded and who were willing to give replay files beyond their profile page for the purpose of comparing hold time graphs. These replays, their graphs, and all my replays and graphs can be found in the description. Taking a look, every oddity is findable in almost every other person's replays. Even Laze's personal technique was able to have similar input patterns to my second technique, in the plays Nasty and Fast-Paced Society. The only extra things to keep in mind are that Qual gave his full replay folder, which he warned included offline DKS testing. This honestly goes for my folder as well, but as per his request, any scores with guest accounts or names have been removed from his folder that I'm showing here. I would also make the point now that my graph spikes aren't at 42 or any other specific millisecond, but in a conversation with an OWC player who wanted to remain anonymous, there are apparently programs specifically made to get around that, so I won't be making that point here. He did say that time warp is 100% detectable though, due to it changing the replay file, so at least there's some positive. In a lot of my plays, I alternate between mashing and actually tapping the jumps. To my knowledge, a macro would not have done this kind of behavior, and you can see in my live plays that I'm not activating any toggle. That is, unless you believe I'm using chud pedals. In relation to the previous point, raking, or any other form of high CPS mashing, naturally causes aim to look like relax. This is because both have the same general goal of tapping as soon as you aim a note, without any strict need for rhythm. Relax does this by tapping a single time as the cause of aiming the note, and mashing/raking does this by creating a line of inputs where no matter where or at what time along that path, it will hit whatever note is in that line. You can also see every rake tapper use this to pass last piece. Kind of like the point I made for chud tapping, if I had a program boosting my tapping, it wouldn't make sense for me to hit any ult or jumps of a map. Generating taps at 0 to 10 milliseconds would be too soon for a program to know what I'm doing, if you're assuming those taps are impossible to have been performed by myself. I do still miss a large amount of jumps that I aim, and you can see in some replays how that's completely costed me scores. In addition to my live plays, I've also done 31 hours of streaming, which include a link to any good score set during the session and interacting with any messages. Before any accusations, I had already been setting scores for the entire latter half of 2024. On the 27th of July, I would also have a player by the name of Controlled Hive spectate my gameplay of Del Rio DTEC, eventually passing the map the same day. I would also go on to record myself achieving another pass with a 14-minute live play. I've been a raw speed player my entire time playing Osu, Even before wooting was a thing, I had passed Hidamari DT at 6-digit and have videos showing random speed scores set before that time. While this is hypothetical, I'm open to performing gameplay in person. Due to where I live, this hasn't been an option, but if one arises, I'll do what I can to take it as an opportunity. Outside of offline D-rank DKS testing, I've never used any form of cheating in any of my plays, and I never intend on doing so in the future. Throughout my entire year-long cooldown, I've reached out to everyone possible and done what I can to prove my legitimacy. I've also been open to providing any live play or resource requested, and have done so for the only two people who have asked or offered, being Minis and the Magic Animals. In this video, I'm providing every replay on this PC and their hold time graphs. I've also been given permission by Minisbett and TMA to publish all relevant messages in our conversations, which you can find in the overall Google Doc. My hope with this video is that the provided evidence is enough, that my account can be finally unbanned, and with my scores remaining undeleted. With all the evidence I've shown, I think this should outweigh any of the claims that have been given to my scores, these only being subjective visual analysis and hold time graphs, which I've shown to be standard for any rake tapping. If you believe I've done what's required to prove my innocence, please like this video so it has a higher chance of being seen by staff. Have a good day, and let's hope for the best.